Hi, my name is Craig Kausen. If you want to know more about the Chuck Jones season of creativity at the Great Park, listen to the interviews here. So in 1999, the before the Chuck Jones Center for Creativity actually was the Chuck Jones Center for Creativity, my mother and I were having a conversation comparing notes about the inspiration that we were hearing and seeing in so many people as we traveled with Chuck, and Chuck was still with us at that point, and that there was this kind of inkling that, or this question of how do we propagate this inspirational opportunity or the reality that Chuck had already been doing for decades. And the story is dated back into the 40s and the 50s, certainly into the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and continued as I traveled with him to art shows around the country. And that there were these moments where people said either his work or his writings, meeting him, his interviews, whatever it was, inspired them in some way. And so this question became, how do we continue this into the future? And one of the folks that we were with said, well, if you're going to do it right. Start a not-for-profit. And hence that time in 1999, the Chuck Jones Center for Creativity was born. It's evolved many times over those years since 1999, but people ask whether or not it was Chuck's dream to have this nonprofit. And it was really more his blessing that he said, oh, that sounds interesting. Go ahead and try that. That sounds great. He didn't really have the goal of inspiring people. I think he just did it naturally. And I know that one of the things, as I observed him with people and when he spoke to groups and just being around him, that he lived in this place much of the time, this place of living in creativity. And it seems kind of overused these days, but he lived in a place where ideas and curiosity and passion all sort of bubbled up inside of him all the time. And I think that's the place where all great ideas come from. And so and he said very clearly, even before we started the Chuck Jones Center for Creativity, that he did not want a legacy. That wasn't his goal. And that his goal was, or people said, how can we honor what you did? Because he and his cohorts back at the time with Looney Tunes and beyond, he said, don't follow in my footsteps. There's already a Chuck Jones. There's already a Friz Freleng. There's already, Mike Maltese out there. Figure out what you're passionate about, what you're interested in, and do that the best you can. And by doing that, you honor what we did, because that is how we created what we created. So that was really the foundations for the Chuck Jones Center for Creativity. And through the programs and the exhibitions and all of the things that come our way that we hopefully say yes to, we continue to create the opportunities for people to find their unique, innate creativity and follow their path to how that will come into the world and make it a better place. So obviously the year 2020 was unique for everybody in the entire world. And the Chuck Jones Center for Creativity was no different. And certainly as we had grown our programs and our reach within both Southern California, in the Chicagoland area, as the Centers for Creativity continued to blossom in person throughout the communities, in sporting events, in you name it, it was sort of evolving in this wonderful way. And then as the pandemic hit, it became clear very quickly that this was going to be a long run. And I mean, at that point, we thought it was going to be, weeks or months, not years, and or over a year. And so I believe that California shut down on a Thursday, and on that day, as we knew, we'd shut down 20 some programs that were out in the community, after school programs and community locations and in-person things at the Center for Creativity. One of our teaching artists said, well, if we can't do things in person, let's figure out how to do them online. And so she and a couple of associates came up with Chuck Jones in Your Home programs, where they created these programs and listed them online, allowed people to download them, work on them, and then share them through social media and their own experiences. And so that began on a Friday. And then, as everybody else, certainly, I didn't have any experience with Zoom or any other video conferencing really at the time. The idea of doing something virtually kind of became a reality in about 24 hours. And on a Saturday, I learned Zoom, and I called Ben Olson out in the head of and the founder of our Chuck Jones Center for Creativity in the Chicagoland, and said on a Sunday, there's this new thing. Let's try this. And he said, okay, I'll download Zoom. And we had this plan. He would be the teaching artist, and I would be the technical guy and sort of the host of the show and make sure what was going on. And so on that Monday, we tested it out, and the technical thing, and we had a couple of people jump on just to see if it was going to work. And on Tuesday morning, that March week, we sent out some social media, and we sent one email out that morning saying, we're going to try this out. Please join us if you're interested. And as we did a little tech check beforehand at about 20 minutes to 10 Pacific time, that as we jumped off and we're going to go to the live video feed on Zoom, we said to each other, well, it'd be great if 5 people showed up. And so Ben and I jumped over, and we got on about 5 minutes to 10. And already there was the participant list, and it was like at 11. So we'd already broken. And some of those were our people that were getting on to see what was happening. But then as it crested toward 10 o'clock, it went from 11 to 15 to 20 to 30 to 40, 50, 60. And literally as it blossomed, our eyes got big, and I welcomed people in almost instantaneously, and then turned it over to Ben, and Ben started a teaching program and on the principles of animation. And all of a sudden we felt like we had something. And so that whole week we did open to the public free programs. And we've had, I believe, 4 continents come in and join us over the last year. We had regulars from Chile and Eastern Europe and all over the country who joined us in these virtual programs. And I believe we're cresting over 200 free programs that have been delivered. Sometimes at the beginning, we were doing 3 a day with different teaching artists. And then as we moved through, then we were doing 1 a day, maybe 4 days a week. And we continue that program month by month because even after the pandemic is now sort of, we're cresting out of the current state of it and getting back in person, there are a lot of Chuck Jones Center for Creativity followers who may never get to come to one of our programs in one of our areas until we spread throughout the world. So the opportunity to create more virtual programs, hybrid programs, we've designed things that would allow virtual presentations in person in destinations all over the place, almost like a robo teacher who then we send out materials and big screen televisions, cameras, iPads to destinations with people in person, and be able to really spread the programs of the Chuck Jones Center for Creativity anywhere, whether or not we can travel at the time or we have the resources who can travel. So it continues to evolve. And I think that in itself was a creative endeavor that really came out of the inspiration of what if we tried. And And that really is the opportunity that we're hoping people will take away from what the Chuck Jones Center for Creativity does. There's a couple. So you're right. It is a little bit like asking a favorite child, but it is, yeah, I am not a trained artist. So my own experience with the programs usually has to do with creating random things. And it's something that was created back in about 2007 or 2008. It started as a program called Literally It's Art, and with the name Litter being the beginning of it. And it used to be called Litter Alley, because in the first Chuck Jones Center for Creativity location in Old Town Orange, there was an alley in the back of the location, and we would set up tables back there, and we would get donations, we would collect leftovers with recycling and you know, old CD-ROMs and paper and pencils and whatever it took that we had on hand or that we could get from local businesses, and we'd load it all up in the alley in the back, and then allow people to create whatever they felt like. There was no real direction on what they could do, and they would find objects within these tables all over the place, and it was amazing what they would create. And so sometimes it would take them 15 or 20 minutes, and sometimes literally it would be hours that they would be creating things, and then they'd add on and adjust. And so for me, that was always a favorite of mine, because I didn't need to have the capabilities to mentor people on how to draw Bugs Bunny, which is another one of my favorites, to experience, to watch, to see how people are guided through that. But in this case, it was the teaching artist. In this case, it might be me and many like youth groups, junior high and high school groups, that we, you know, have tables full of things, and they'd come in, and usually they were guided through programs, but these huge events we were just a part of, that they'd come in and they'd go, okay, what do we do? And they say, go ahead. And they usually look at you and go, well, what are we supposed to do? So you're supposed to do whatever you want to do. And then they'd start, and then they'd sort of see what the other person might be doing, and then they'd kind of work on their own thing, and sometimes they collaborate. And so Literally It's Art turned into Acme Inventions, trying to, you know, create and maintain the brand of Looney Tunes and Chuck Jones creations like Roadrunner and Coyote. That Acme Inventions was born, and that was you know, probably mid 2010. So 13, 14, 15, Acme Inventions began, and then sometimes there was the opportunity to say, all right, we're going to focus on something like transportation. And that was the only thing. It was these small groups that would get together, and the word was transportation. And then they would figure out what they wanted to do. They'd team, you know, they'd talk about what they wanted to do, and then they would figure out how they were going to achieve it with just random things that were laid on tables, and they could use just about anything that was available to them. And then over the next few hours, and sometimes a 2-hour program would propagate into 3 or 4 hours because no one wanted to finish. And the idea of this creative process being let loose so that people get that experience of tapping into their creativity became the real signal of what we wanted to achieve in each of these programs. So personally, that's my favorite. I love Acme Inventions. I've done it both virtually and in person many, many times. And it's something that I feel confident in encouraging and potentially helping those over stumbling blocks. Because that's really what the teaching artists are doing, is not teaching necessarily, but helping people through those difficult moments. So the Chuck Jones Season of Creativity that is currently going on in the City of Irvine at the Great Park came to fruition from one of our board members, Fernando Del Rosario, who is a creative director and runs his own business, and Concept Zombie, which is a great name. And so Fernando was out in the community and had all kinds of interactions with all types of people and partnerships that he's established. And he came across a gentleman, Kevin Staniak, who was in he's the arts director of the Great Park, and he and his team put on exhibitions at the Great Park. And so this it was nearly 3 years ago, around 2018, I think, that really these beginning conversations started to be done. And I have lived in Irvine for 30 years, and the Center for Creativity has probably performed and delivered more programs in the city of Irvine because of the after-school programs with the ACE enrichment, the after-class enrichment programs through Irvine Public School Foundations, in-class programs in Irvine, community locations around. So it was a natural next step for us to start these discussions about doing an exhibition with the city of Irvine at the Great Park. And they do quarterly events. And so we started to point to the summer of 2021. So we have a couple years to develop. A lot of the elements that were chosen were the elements that were actually in the Smithsonian tour. So when the Chuck Jones Center for Creativity and the Chuck Jones Museum partnered with Motion Picture Academy, the Museum of Moving Image in New York, and the Smithsonian to create this traveling exhibition, development of that started in about 2012, and then toured around the country from 2014 to 2017, and then continued in the Schaumburg and Chicagoland area with Ben's proliferation of the exhibitions throughout the community there, that this was something that we could plan on. And so and really develop properly. And so our team, along with the city and Great Parks arts teams, got together and created the Season of Creativity, which is not only a museum exhibition, which is stellar. The objects in there, many of which have never been seen before. They're out of the Chuck Jones Museum archives and were specifically chosen to complement the types of things that were in the Smithsonian before. It's a very large space down there. So the challenge was to figure out how to tell a story and then complement it throughout the city with in-person programs like Saturday morning cartoons and drawing, which we have done in many cities throughout the country. Which are now being done once a month. We've got the Chuck Jones Big Draw, which is an event that started in 2011 and has been the same throughout communities throughout the country at different times, where many teaching artists get together, people come, they get to sign up or drop into a section. Maybe it's on how to draw Bugs Bunny, maybe it's on how to draw horses, maybe it's a photography, maybe it's a quick painting class, maybe it's an Acme Inventions that are going on in different areas within a destination. And sometimes it's been in a baseball game, sometimes it's been in a G League basketball game. We've done it in huge community destinations. We've done it in hotel rooms. We've done it in Comic-Cons. It continues to evolve, but the premise is the same, where you set the stage, you provide the materials, and then people have the opportunity to create. And sometimes through a guided, sometimes through just things are there, go ahead, create a character, and I'll be here in case you get frustrated. And so the teaching artists are there. So this Season of Creativity is a 3-month run that started on July 4th in 2021 and runs through September 12th. There are programs throughout the city in the arts destinations, in schools, in the Great Park itself. There's a lecture series that goes on. There's Jerry Beck talking about the history of Chuck's involvement with wartime films, since it is a former military base. The tie-in of that is an interesting, what was going on in World War II in particular, when Chuck was working on snafu cartoons and training films and with Warner Brothers at the time. And Eric Goldberg, the preeminent animation director and animator from Disney and Looney Tunes, will be speaking. And then we're going to do a collaborative effort on the history of Chuck Jones in September. So it is sort of this all-encompassing, hopefully citywide celebration of creativity. And Irvine is so multidimensional. And as I said, I've been here for 30 years, and all my kids have come up through the educational system, through the public schools here. And it just seems like a perfect way for us to share what we do with the Chuck Jones Center for Creativity with the City of Irvine and anybody from Southern California or beyond who wants to come and see it. So one unique attribute of this experience, that at the Chuck Jones Season of Creativity at the Great Park, it's the first time that I have been able to bring my computer engineering background into play. And although I'm not doing the development, I have been lucky enough to meet some folks down in San Diego who are creative technical geniuses, who are bringing not only virtual reality experiences with what we do, museum experiences, but augmented reality experiences to what we're doing at the Chuck Jones Season of Creativity. So through a special link that the city is now proliferating, you on your device, your phone, your iPad, you click on it, and it then discovers where you are, anywhere in the world. And then the Looney Tunes characters begin to talk to you. And so you have the opportunity to have this dialogue from wherever, and it then zooms across the world or across the neighborhood to the Great Park to show you exactly where it is. And it then requests that you come and join. And so when you get there, there are characters that are established at certain locations around the Palm Courts Arts Complex and the surrounding areas, near the Big Orange Balloon, near the Carousel, in the Palm Courts area, near the Green Belt, that you can go and find on your map, on your phone, and then you can click on the character, and it allows you then to bring that a three-dimensional version of that character right in front of you on your camera or your iPad, so that you can experience and create your own fun. So it's the first time that the virtual reality, augmented reality, and the Chuck Jones Museum and Center for Creativity have come together at once. So this is truly a cross-tech pollination of Looney Tunes, of history, of video, of experience that continues to evolve throughout the exhibition and all summer long. So it is it's pushing the envelope of how the museum experience is being experienced. So I am asked what would be a successful run of this exhibition, the Season of Creativity, the Chuck Jones Season of Creativity in Irvine. And I think that a success would be the opportunity to share, in this case, the storyline behind the exhibition is how Chuck Jones created a cartoon. And that is the communication that hopefully is given when somebody walks into the space. So it's an education as well as an experience. So it's a little known fact to most people that the Warner Brothers cartoons were not created in big production, like Disney, where films were made over years, and that like the big guys were doing the Looney Tunes cartoons being the short subjects. That was the specialty of Warner Brothers. Those those products, let's say, those films were made to go into the theaters before theatrical releases of live action films, to be a part of the entertainment when people went to the theater. They would see a newsreel, they would see a cartoon, they would see a live action feature or two. And so it was a show. And so those cartoons were made as a small part of a bigger show. And so the opportunity that was given to these mostly men, many women, both in the production and certainly in the ink and paint department back then in the 30s and 40s and 50s and into the 60s, when the Looney Tunes, Warner Brothers cartoon studio was still in existence, that they needed to create a large number of cartoons to go out, because that was what Warner Brothers, before they bought the studio from Leon Schlesinger, that was what they were doing. They were buying them and then sending them out for the entertainment value, because the theater owners demanded a show. They were going to charge a nickel or a dime to get in, which was a lot of money, especially in the 30s and the Depression and the 40s during the war. And people, it was a place to congregate. It was a place to go get information. It was a place to go and be distracted from the challenges of the Depression and the war and even post-war. So the idea that there was not a lot of money being generated, so these guys were not paid well at Warner Brothers. And Leon, although he was a wealthy man, he was a good businessman and created this opportunity for these guys. But one of the things that Leon and his successor, Eddie Selzer, the producer of Warner Brothers, had in common is they really didn't understand how to make an animated cartoon. So they left that to the professionals, which were the animation directors. They ran their own unit. So Chuck and Frizz and Bob McKimson, and early on Bob Clampett and Tex Avery at Warner Brothers and a few others would create their small unit of animators, writers, background people, and then they shared ink and painters throughout the production process, and camera people and sound effects. And then they, the music that was all done, they all shared those assets. So within this exhibition, the idea is that how did Chuck and the other directors, for the most part, but specifically Chuck in this case, create a cartoon with the discipline that was provided and the constraints that were there at Warner Brothers, which was, you have to come in on budget, you have to come in on time, because Leon was not going to pay for more than the minimal amount so that they had to get this done. And the theater owners demanded at least 6 minutes for a cartoon. And so the discipline was to create them at least 6 minutes, but of course, Leon didn't want to pay for more than 6 minutes. And there was no editing, there was no reshoots, there was nothing that was done. So they had to figure out a process on how to create a cartoon as efficiently as possible. And each of these cartoons would take between 6 and 9 months from start to finish, from concept to screen or to the actual camera. And so, and they would have to do between 8 and 10 cartoons per unit per year. And so anybody who's good at math is like, well, wait a minute, if they're taking 6 to 9 months, how on earth can you possibly do 8 to 10 a year? And the way they did it was to create a production line process where the director and the storyman would work together for 5 weeks to create a storyline and go through that process. And then as that crested into layout and timing, that the director would take all of those storyboards and go into the next to do all of these layout drawings, 400 or 500 specific layout drawings. So anybody good at math would take a look and say, how do you get 6 to 9 month cartoon creations and get 8 to 10 of them a year? And the way they did that was to create a production line process. And what I mean is that they would go into story for 5 weeks. So the director and the story person would work on story and create storyboards for 5 weeks. And then as those storyboards then went into layout and timing, another story would start. So they had a set process of going from the storyboards into layout and timing with exposure sheets, and then the animation would happen for 5 weeks, and so and then ink and paint, and then so the story within this exhibition of the Season of Creativity is how the characters were developed, how the storyboards were developed, how the layout drawings were done, what they looked like, how they were timed down to a 24th of a second, which is an amazing thing to think that the film was in the minds of the directors down to a 24th of a second before the production ever started, before animation ever started. So to coordinate all those things and to have 6 or 7 or 8 films in production at any given time going through the process was in itself an art form, let alone the byproducts of the cartoons coming out the other end and all of the elements that went into there. So within the exhibition, there's layout drawings, there's early model sheets, there's early storyboards that were done. There's a storyboard by Mike Maltese, which is an incredibly rare thing to see, of a Tom and Jerry cartoon. There's development sketches for backgrounds that were done by the background and layout teams. There's animation sequences, so you can see how detailed each one of these can be and how much work it takes of hand drawing each one of these 24th of a second drawings, all the way to the ink and paint process, and then what actually came under the camera. So it really is an educational process that is being delivered. And so truly a success for me is that people will go away with the understanding of, wow, behind the curtain, behind the scenes, there was a heck of a lot of work that went in to creating these films that just seem a bit effortless at the end of the day, with Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck having a dialogue, and that's what we remember, not necessarily all the hard work that went into it. So this is kind of a look behind the curtain to see how it's done. I guess my hope is that when people come both to the exhibition, to the lecture series that happen, to the hands-on programs of drop in and draw, the big draws, the all of the things that are associated with a Season of Creativity, that a person would be not only educated, but perhaps inspired, because everything that happened within these cartoons was being invented along the way. There was no animation process before the early 20s into the 30s. There wasn't a standard way, and Warner Brothers did their own thing to create a method of creating this byproduct, these cartoons. And so this pool of individuals that were working together collaboratively to create these funny cartoons to go out and entertain, I hope that people who experience it in any way throughout the Season of Creativity will potentially be inspired themselves to think a little bit more creatively in their own lives. I'm asked a lot about the importance of allowing young people to experience arts when they're young, and so when they're growing up. And I'm a firm believer that there are significant benefits to allowing and immersing young people in the arts. But my perception of it is a little bit different than many people. That teaching somebody how to play an instrument or how to draw a certain way or to have the techniques is a great benefit, I think, for their own upbringing. But for me, the importance of exposing young people to the arts is more about allowing their creative mind, their creative intelligence, their unique creativity that exists inside of each of them to be exercised. Because it has been proven that it is the creativity that exists that is like a muscle. It needs to be exercised, and it needs to be exercised from an early age. Most young people are already intrinsically very creative. And studies have shown for decades that creativity is existing in young people. And so, thinking differently, problem solving, seeing things in a new way is something that we're born with. And so through traditional education, oftentimes that creativity is squelched. And so the desire to allow young people to have a platform to exercise their creative mind is imperative. And I think that arts programs is an opportunity for that. But I do believe that there can also be exercising creativity in science, in business, in educational processes and really that's what the Center for Creativity is all about. It's to inspire everybody, particularly to provide that opportunity for young people to exercise their creative genius. So it's not just about the arts. It's about creating a culture that encourages particularly young people to think differently, to find that creative juice inside them, that unique passion, and not to just be like everybody else. And there's so many things that we can learn that do serve us well. I'm a scientist, I'm a mathematician, I'm an engineer. Those are my passions, but there are creative elements that imbue all of those. And that was what was always interesting to me about those disciplines, is to think differently. How can you solve this problem differently? You do have to understand the basics of math and science and to learn what other people have done. The same way that an artist needs to learn the basics of drawing or painting, but then it's not so much what you learn, all of those techniques, it's what you do with them. A true artist, and that is a gift word that someone, there's an artist, takes all that they have learned in any discipline and then recombines it into something that they uniquely share. So the idea of allowing young people, hopefully through the arts, because that's what our society seems to understand on where creativity is okay, that they have the opportunity to exercise that creative genius in any parts of their education or their lives. As I mentioned about the inception of the Chuck Jones Center for Creativity, about how Chuck, his work, his philosophies influenced so many diverse people. It's not just artists, it's not just animators, it's not just quote unquote any artist per se. It's theater, it's movies, it's scientists, it's different types of art that are influenced. We had a show with some graffiti artists down in San Diego a number of years back, and come to find out, speaking with them, that the Looney Tunes, and particularly Roadrunner and Coyote and some of the other major characters, were a major influence on the graffiti movement in the arts in the 1970s, which I didn't ever hear that before. And so to have someone share their own inspiration in some unlikely way, that Chuck's influence continues to spread, it does surprise me and take me. I don't get shocked anymore because I've heard it so many times, but it always gives me a little bit of joy inside to understand even more how his persona, his philosophies, his work has influenced 6-7 generations already. And it seems to continue as people really realize what this small group of people did in their creative bubble, I would say. That's sort of what it looks like from afar is that they were given the opportunity to be truly creative, and that byproduct of this creative environment continues to inspire creativity in others. As the Chuck Jones Center for Creativity continues to expand, both locally in Southern California and throughout the country, with the Chicagoland Chuck Jones Center for Creativity continuing to thrive, and others throughout the country inquiring about how they can get involved in whether it be programs virtually or in person, or even discussions about how a Center for Creativity could be established in their community from many different states. And so, and truly around the world. So how both the season of creativity, which is now a thing. I think it started out with the summer of creativity and the first event that was established years ago. And then as winter became the next season of, well, we can't really call it the summer of creativity in winter. So what do we say? It's the season of creativity, that these individual pop-ups like Chuck Jones Big Draws at different events, different destinations, museum exhibition runs that can go out. We've got at least a couple handfuls of different types of exhibitions that have traveled around the country, and some internationally, that the opportunity to really go where people are interested in both experiencing the programs and the exhibitions. We will continue, hopefully, to say yes as many times as we can, so that any community who's interested in participating with the Chuck Jones Center for Creativity can have that happen in their own backyard. As I've become involved with nonprofits more and more since we established the Chuck Jones Center for Creativity in 1999, and we've partnered with dozens of other nonprofits and come into contact with hundreds more who are doing so much good in the community. And a nonprofit organization, or should I say a not-for-profit organization, that the way that they contribute to the community it's really unparalleled, because you can't just mandate doing good. There is a person or a group of people who are interested in bringing something good to the community, whether it's solving a problem or just creating an environment where people can thrive better. That cornerstone of our community or of our society is one that people point to like, oh, they're just good people. But it really is the entire community, not only the benefits, but is required to sustain the way that these organizations work. And they're not always to cure an ailment. They're not always to solve an endemic problem that exists. Sometimes they are just to make life a little better for the average person that exists, and maybe have them turn around and do something that betters the community. So it not only takes participation, the leadership and those few people who are actually running the organization, big or small, it's not for profit, but it takes those who volunteer, it takes those who participate, it takes those who support, it takes businesses that get involved, whether they're donating for fundraisers or the monetary things that get donated to support these not-for-profits is critical, because there is normally not a method that allows these organizations to fully economically support themselves. So it is a combination of social enterprise as well as community support, fundraising, participating, and people ask, well, why do you do this? And I look back at some of the things that Chuck said, and it resonates more now than when I first heard him say it when I was growing up, that that someone asked if I could do it. And it was an opportunity that came, and how could I say no? So that seems to be exactly the way I approach participating with any organization. If I believe that it can do some good and that I have an opportunity to participate in some way, then how can I say no? And so I would encourage anybody who is inspired. You know, you may not have all the money in the world to be able to donate, but usually there is the opportunity to donate some time, to donate some leadership, to donate something. And what you get back from supporting a nonprofit organization comes back in, I would say tenfold, but 100-fold in so many different ways. I've been asked by both friends and extended acquaintances, whether it be on social media or in person, you know, why should I go down there other than you know, you said it's very cool, and is this a must see? And I remember Chuck saying that, you know, that you know, you must, and he'd say, you know what, I don't have to, but I'm going to choose to do whatever it was. And so the idea that somebody would want to, and I think that I can nearly ensure that if you and the family, or whoever, the feedback that I've already gotten from the exhibition being open now, that it was an inspiring, informative experience, and that whether spend an hour in there or 2 or 3 hours understanding all of the detail that's in there. There's videos, there's interviews with Chuck that are being shown on the top of his desk. So it's a nice interactive experience that it is an opportunity for the whole family to be together. And I'm talking grandparents, great-grandparents, great-grandchildren from the age of 3 or 4, because many of these characters are already on the tongues of young people who are talking about Tom and Jerry and Looney Tunes and all of the resurgence of these cartoon characters that Chuck made so famous. And to see how he created them nearly a century ago and evolved them over the last, you know, starting as long ago as 90 years, that there's a history there that perpetuates. It is a family-friendly place, and the Great Park in itself is fun to go visit, which most people have not been to, but I encourage everybody to go, not just to this exhibition, to experience what's going on and what is new at the Great Park. So I am Chuck Jones's grandson. My name's Craig Kausen. If you enjoyed this conversation today, I encourage you to come down to the Chuck Jones Season of Creativity at the Great Park in Irvine and experience all the lectures, the hands-on experiences, and certainly in the gallery itself, the exhibition that we've put together for you. Hope to see you there.